My Lords, in following the noble lady Baroness Fox of Buckley, I feel I have to briefly offer a defence of targets, and I think particularly a defence of the target of ensuring that everyone in the UK has a warm, comfortable, affordable to heat home. And I hope that no one would disagree with the target of ending our utterly disgraceful excess winter deaths that come as a large part because of the poor quality of our housing stock, as well as indeed the targets that we're talking about here in terms of our natural environment on which our entire economy, our lives depend. So I will actually be fairly brief, and I want to speak particularly in favour of the Amendment 34 in the name of the noble lady Baroness Parmenter. And as the noble Lord Teverson just said, this really would seem to be a very easy, very obvious amendment for the government to accept. As the noble lady Baroness Parmenter says, that the government can ask the Office of Environmental Protection for guidance on the targets is simply not good enough, and it doesn't reflect what's in the Climate Change Act. And what we're very much seeing we're doing is creating a parallel here between action on climate and action in biodiversity, and to mirror those two things would seem to be a very obvious, simple and not very difficult step. On Amendment 19, in the name of the noble Lord Addington, I think, consulting the Department of Health, I would actually go broader. The noble Lord, in his introduction to this amendment, spoke particularly about recreation and the value of nature, the natural environment to recreation. I think when we think about health, the health of human beings, the health of the natural environment is related in much deeper ways than that. And I would point noble Lords to a very interesting United Nations scheme called HUMI, H-U-M-I, the Human Urban Microbiome Initiative, which addresses a really fast-growing, developing area of science. We're understanding about the human microbiome and how that's actually related to our health, both our physical and mental health, and how what's happening around us in the natural world is utterly integral to a healthy microbiome. I also want to speak in favour of the amendments in the name of the noble Lord Wigley, 41A and 41B. Again, we are really in what could be described as no-brainer territory. We surely should not be imposing anything on the nations in terms of environmental regulation in areas that devolved. It should not be imposed on the nations without their prior consent. And I think those words, prior consent, are very important. But I think this does also raise an area that I haven't seen very broadly discussed, and I think perhaps we might like to think about further. And that is the fact, of course, as the noble Lord Wigley said, rivers, waters don't suddenly get to a border, a national border, and stop and turn around and say, oh, I'm Welsh water, I'm staying there in Wales. That's also true, of course, of birds, of insects, of mammals, of the whole ecosystems. And a question, perhaps either for today or a future date to the noble Lord the Minister, is how this bill, this To Be Act, will fit within the common framework, will fit within coordinating with efforts of the nations on these islands, how that's going to work, thinking also of many of the debates we had in the Internal Market Bill Now Act.